light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Hu. Today I wanted to offer a few thoughts on political offices, I guess one would say, as public service rather than as career opportunities. I'm not a political science major. I'm not even a history major. I've done enough reading and have thought deeply about everything throughout my life, though, that I think there are some ideas, at least a perspective I could offer during the next half hour that may get a conversation going, may scratch the surface. Because I think these are things that more of us really do need to have concern for, be concerned about, and be involved in, discuss. Clearly we're living at a time where the world has functioned by national divisions for several hundred years, but we're coming to a time where, because of international communication, travel, and commerce, we need to form a global community, and the systems that we have in place may not be adequate to do that. They may not have the capacity to serve a global community very well. And so I guess what I'm hoping to offer in the next half hour is some food for thought, some possibilities, maybe something that gets your thinking going so that you can come up with an even better idea. Something that allows humanity to become a mutually respectful, relatively peaceful, ongoing global community. I'm reminded of how George Washington didn't really want to be the first president. He didn't really want to be involved in any of that. And then I was told that somebody heard, I guess, that George Washington wanted the presidency to be a volunteer position. And I thought, what a brilliant idea. And there were so many brilliant governing documents that were drafted during that time that Americans really need to study those documents more closely and to understand the principles that form the axis or the skeleton around which those documents are constructed. You know, the basics, like we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with life, with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You know, the principles that there could be a right that is given by a divine Creator, and that it's inalienable, that there is no government or authority of any sort that could take this right away, that it's a right that is inherent in being a living human being. You know, and when we have a deeper understanding of those principles, to understand that governments are about societal collaboration, not about domination, not about hierarchy or submitting to this, but about making things collaborative and cohesive and harmonious, making things work by putting all the pieces together so they fit, like the gear wheels inside a clock, having all the teeth mesh so that the clock actually runs and keeps time and keeps accurate time and keeps running. And so they set up the U.S. government with this initial idea that there should be judicial and legislative and executive, and the three should be checks and balances for each other and hold each other accountable. Obviously that worked in certain times and not so much in other times, because the accountability hasn't been very well maintained. It seems to me one of the principal problems, and I think George Washington very much modeled that, is that the political office is about public service. It's not about a career. It's not a career opportunity. And when you have someone who turns it into a career opportunity and they begin to hold on to that position for term after term after term after term and give this excuse of, well, I have more experience. Well, they have experience in a particular set of circumstances or on a particular set of events. But because of the way time and history is always changing, that could actually be a problem, because they may not be current on what the needs of the people are. And in fact, because things have become so monetarily oriented, it's questionable whether anyone in our national legislature really understands what every American faces on a daily basis. That we have both the rich and the poor, that we have homeless people in this country. And perhaps what is needed is for every elected official at least once a month to sit down to lunch with a homeless person and get to know them enough to understand how they think and what they need, what their values are, what the challenges to simply being an American citizen who is homeless are. To sit down to lunch at least once a month with a woman of whatever race or description, to get a sense of what is it like to be a woman in America, and what is it like to be a working man in America. Thankfully, at the present time, we now have a great number of women who have become elected representatives and officials, senators, and so forth. My understanding is that they are still by far in the minority, and it is not anywhere near 50%, what was called gender parity, an equal number of men and women in the government. But that there is still a male-dominated government in place. Is that good or bad? Well, it depends upon the people who are occupying the positions, because every government, regardless of gender, is only as good as the people who are running it. Every business is only as good as the people who are running it. Every job is only as good as the person who does the job, if they're doing it with integrity and with commitment, with an attitude toward excellence and service, or whether they are doing it in a minimal sort of way, doing the least that they need to do to get by, the least they need to do to keep from getting fired, the least they need to do to secure that regular paycheck. Instead of understanding that they're individuals part of a much greater, larger, and more complex society, and that it is not the survival of any individual that matters as much as, well, I'm stating the things erroneously here, I apologize. It is not that you have individuals and you have the community, and it is not that we need to focus upon this individual or that individual or this type of individual surviving, as that we need to focus on all individuals surviving, and that name that we give to all individuals surviving is community. And what further makes it community is that the way for all these individuals to survive is by working together, and by accepting that we are all different, and that everyone has a different perspective, and that with all the colleges and universities and diverse perspectives, we have the understanding and the perception we need if we can just bring it together and integrate all of this. We have what we need to create a peaceful, effective, functioning community. Part of that has to be not only saying, but living like we really believe that everyone matters. And as if we were some kind of giant global tribe, to say that if there is anyone who is doing without, that it is disgraceful for anyone else to have excess, that it is wrong for someone to have more than they need while there are people who don't have enough. But the problem with signing that off to the government to fix the problem is that the enforcement, the redistribution, comes at the person from without, and in that sense begins to emulate an oppressor or a tyrant, taking something from the one who has excess, instead of having it embedded within that person by a set of values and by the cultural conditioning. That if we could raise our children and condition ourselves to think that when we have enough, when we have accomplished the modest, balanced state, there is the house, there is the food, everything is adequate. That above and beyond that, we now have the ability to become guardian angels to other people in the world. And that is a very high and precious and wondrous calling. That anything we have above that, we now have the freedom to find constructive ways to put our wealth, our excess, into places and into people's lives where it can make a profound difference, where it can say to the person who says, the young person who has the motivation, has the self-discipline, has the determination, but does not have the money to go to college, to say, get ready, you're going to college. And you will have to work and you will have to keep your grades up, but as long as you do, it's covered. Don't tell yourself it's impossible and don't think you can't do it. And to say to the person who's willing to work hard every day that you will not be homeless. We will make sure that there is a roof over your head. We will find a way to make construction of houses and occupation of houses affordable so that you don't have to worry about sleeping out in the rain or freezing to death in the wintertime. You will have a warm, dry house in which to live, someplace to come home, someplace that's secure, someplace that's safe, where you don't have to worry about break-ins all the time. Somebody burglarizing your house because they don't have enough, or because they are somehow missing something in their lives that their community could have provided but didn't, or maybe their community did provide and for reasons unknown they refused to accept it. There was a time when it was a common practice in this country to pay employees less than what they needed to pay their bills and provide housing and food and so forth. The infamous company store. The idea being that the company would build housing for the workers and the workers could stay in them and the workers could go to the company store and buy what they needed to stay alive, to feed themselves and so forth. But the prices that were being charged for the housing and for the company store purchases was higher than what the workers were being paid, such that by becoming employed with the company, you were essentially selling yourself into slavery, because you would work there till the day you died, because you would never be able to pay off the debt, because the debt was going up faster than your income was. And it created a modern form of feudalism and serfdom. The oppressive system of economics that mostly described the European Middle Ages. Coming back to our main topic, though, it is possible, I believe, to go back to George Washington's vision of political office being public service. We have the knowledge, we have the wisdom, we can restructure the government in such a way that there are no election campaigns. Nobody runs for re-election. Whatever office somebody gets into, they're only in it once. And then it becomes somebody else's turn. And the thing that keeps the country on track is the Constitution and the governments. And what is decided by each person in office is very akin to what a jury does, in told to simply render a guilty or not guilty verdict on a specific question, and to make our laws very specific and to eliminate the loopholes, that there will not be all sorts of quirks and benefits for corporations or for this person or that person, but that we will be an equal people under law, and that there will be no double standards. What works for one person needs to be able to work for every person. And when we have that, to consider that when or if, kind of like jury duty, when we get a notice in the mail that says you're being requested to come serve your country as a national legislature for the next 4 years, that there will be systems that support our home and family life while that is happening, but not in a way that makes it a financially lucrative objective, ways that are oriented around sustaining the individual and sustaining the country, and creating an egalitarian, stable, healthy form of society, that everybody would have enough, and once everybody has enough, that those who have the ingenuity and the motivation to do so if they so wish, could have more. But even as they acquire more, that they are not allowed to forget that they remain creative, ambitious individuals who are still part of their country and who consequently must remain concerned for every person in their country having at least enough. There's a sense in which, I mean, this sounds like a utopia, I suppose, and I'm simply brainstorming here, and again, I'm not a political science major or something like that. I think this could work, but it depends on a couple things. Well, obviously more than a couple things, but the two things that come most quickly to mind. First of all, that we have a minimum of love for each other. Even if we take that all the way down to a level of calling it mutual respect, that there is a way that we see value in every single person, and that when someone has experienced a psychological trauma, part of keeping everybody at this level of having enough is seeing that they get whatever help they need. That a child who has been molested gets adequate psychological counseling to break the cycle of that molestation so that they do not become molesters when they grow up. That when somebody loses a beloved family member in a tragic way, they get whatever psychological counseling they need to process that grief so that it does not become a brokenness that overflows its banks into others' lives and begins to create greater and greater dysfunctions and paranoia and essentially community breakdown, and yet in such a subtle way that hardly anybody notices it happening. In every case where there has been somebody who, after a certain period of time, resorted to extreme violence, it seems to me every single example has a story of pain and heartache behind it. All sorts of situations in which the community did not respond, or in which the individual wanted to make a contribution and the community would not accept the contribution, wouldn't nurture the contribution, wouldn't validate the contribution, and not really even give a reason why. Which would render it all the more frustrating, because at that point the person is simply being excluded and censored, not nurtured as they need to be. Communities renew themselves by nurturing their individuals, no matter how anomalous, and individuals survive by contributing to their communities. And I, having spent years pondering that basic cycle, that basic exchange between individual and community, I've not been able to come up with a single problem in all of human history that cannot be explained as a breakdown of that equation. The challenge that remains in front of us at the present time, though, I'm putting this out as an idea, and I'm hoping it catches on. I'm hoping people with the wherewithal to begin to act on it do so. I'm hoping that it's an idea that gets spread around until everybody knows it, and at that point we can put our heads together and decide, okay, if we all know this, how do we want to actually begin to do it? And that, of course, is the other major challenge. If we can envision a world in which needs are met, people are loved, nurturing of diverse individuals happens, adequate food, clothing, and shelter is a reasonable expectation for everyone, not because the government ordered it, but because each individual person in the community wants it, so that the support of each other comes from within us instead of being dictated to us. That it's me wanting to support everyone in my community. It's me wanting to have a community where nobody goes hungry. It's me wanting to have a community where no one is homeless. And when everybody in a community feels that way, putting our heads together and pooling our resources and finding a way to make it happen. Because any time and every time that the majority of a community has found that kind of solidarity around any issue, inevitably what they have been pursuing happened. It did manifest, and it did happen once they got together as a group and decided, yes, we really, all of us, really do want this to happen. As long as the greed and the competition persist, however, it's essentially a divide and conquer strategy. As long as people who have some narcissistic selfish interest in some basis of greed or self-centeredness, by which they're able to manipulate others' opinions, and by which they're able to instigate competition and adversarial relationships within society. Those people, those entities, those corporations manage to walk away with enormous sums of wealth, but at the expense of a whole lot of nameless and faceless people who are absolutely real people. Just because we don't know them doesn't mean they don't exist. To the extent that we allow them to continue dividing us, that we allow congressmen to be isolated from their constituents so that they don't even really understand what the experience of their constituents is, to the extent that they are so surrounded by limousines and expensive hotels and everything else that they don't know what an average American life is, other than an intellectual concept in a book. To the extent that people are allowed to impose upon others living conditions under which they themselves would never consent to live. Those are the sorts of things that keep us from from achieving the solidarity and the global compassion that we would need to create a genuinely sustainable human race that would express itself all the way from an individual with unique dreams of being a painter or a photographer or an engineer or a doctor or a farmer or a rancher or whatever, all the way from that individual to a community that envisions having zero crime because everybody's needs are being met in legitimate ways. A community where there is no alcoholism to deal with because people have learned coping mechanisms and strategies and ways of relating so that a little wine with dinner makes sense, but there is no reason to go get drunk to forget your troubles because your community has helped you to resolve all those troubles. And you haven't had to face them alone because in every situation there was somebody who was willing to stand by you through the difficult moments of life when tragedy happened, whether it was a tornado and your loved one was killed, or whether it was a fire and your house burned to the ground, to the next day have your community showing up like an Amish barn raising, everybody bringing what they can, and in a matter of days rebuilding your home and saying, now, let's get on with life again. Tragedy happens and also healing. But the healing happens specifically by the solidarity and the working together of all of us. It's not one person trying to do it all on their own. It's recognizing that the money is to serve the people, not the people the money. And it's recognizing that the politicians are to be statesmen, not just negotiators of contracts, but statesmen, people skilled in the craft of governing a large nation, of governing a diverse people. But if we're to make political offices opportunities for public service instead of political careers, there's a sense in which that invites all of us to become statesmen. In my earliest readings of the thing I wanted to bring out was when I read that in order to be considered a truly virtuous person, each person was to be as adept at political statesmanship as they were at poetry and art and music, to be as adept at military defense as they were at doing folk dances. That each of us develop ourselves so that we can be creative and artistic and poetic and skilled in engineering and labor. And the question comes up, could one person really do all of those things? I'm inclined to say no, because I recognize that each of us has specific aptitudes. As soon as I say that, though, it's a question. The question also pops up: at what level? There will be some people who will be masterful ballet dancers, and there are some people who will do folk dances and less formal sorts of things. The point is not who does what, but that everybody does what they can and develops themselves to whatever extent they're able to. Not everyone is going to feel drawn to be a ballet dancer or to be a computer programmer, but whatever one is drawn to do, it is possible to raise it to the level of being an art. That if you're to be an investigative reporter, to do the best investigative journalism possible, to keep it objective and not indulge sensationalism and yellow journalism, as they call it, that which warps the report in the direction of some sort of propaganda or perspective or hidden agenda. If you're a janitor, to do it with such expertise that people can't find a speck of dust anywhere in the building. Whatever you do, to raise it to the level of an art, to make what you do beautiful. And I believe that everything can be done that way, but it begins to some extent with understanding that each of us is a valuable person. We just may not be valued at the moment. If you are, I'm not going to say if you are a valuable person, if you are not valued at the present time, I would still insist that you are a valuable person. If you are not valued, I ask that you be patient with humanity, that we all be patient with humanity,